Hello and welcome to the Springer Nature webinar, which is being held as part of this year's Peer Review Week. Thank you very much for joining us today. I am Ayako in the communications team, and together with Sayaka in institutional marketing, we will be hosting this session from Tokyo in Japan. Today we have Sowmya Swaminathan, who is the head of editorial policy and research integrity at Springer Nature, who will be speaking to you about how we build trust in research through transparency and peer review. We will be having a question and answer session after the presentation, so please feel free to enter questions in the question box of this GoToWebinar platform. Please note that we will be recording the session and we will be switching off our cameras during this presentation. So without further ado, I will now like to hand over to Sowmya for her talk.
Thank you, Ayako. Sayaka, I just want to check that you have now given me presenter rights.
Okay.
Wonderful. So I'm sharing my screen now. And could you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm delighted to be having this opportunity to speak to you about Springer Nature's initiatives in peer review. Public trust in research is more important than ever today, and peer review, of course, is a first essential step to how we can ensure trust in published research. At Springer Nature, we believe that transparency is central to building trust in published research and in the peer review process. So I'm hoping today to share with you a number of peer review initiatives at Springer Nature that focus on transparency in peer review, as well as talking to you about InReview, which is a new service that focuses on early sharing through preprints, as well as transparency in peer review. So Springer Nature is a global publisher dedicated to providing the best possible service to the entire research community. Through our portfolio of over 3,000 journals, we publish around 340,000 articles per year. We coordinate with a network of 750,000 peer reviewers to manage the peer review process and to shepherd these articles to publication. So peer review is at the heart of what we do as a global research publisher. We believe that peer review has a vital role in maintaining scientific quality, and that transparency in peer review is central to building trust in our process and in ensuring trust in published research. So today I'll tell you about some of the initiatives focusing on transparency in peer review, as well as about our initiatives to improve diversity in peer review and to support early career researchers. So peer review, which is basically the process through which academic scholarly research is scrutinized by peer experts. It's a phase in the publishing process after a manuscript has been editorially assessed and a decision has been made to send the manuscript out for formal peer review. The editors who are experts in the field select and invite reviewers, and the reviewers provide their expert assessment on the basis of which editors make an independent decision on the manuscript. We expect reviewers to provide a fair and objective report that's based on the science that helps editors determine whether the study is sound and whether the claims are supported. So we build trust at every point in the peer review process. For example, at this early stage of peer review, in the process of selecting and inviting and accepting reviewers, two key aspects of trust that are really important are confidentiality and competing interest. We ask reviewers to keep the information about the manuscript confidential, and we ask them to declare any competing interests that they may have in relation to the study that they have accepted to review. So there are four main types of peer review across the industry. At Springer Nature, we offer all 4 types of review across our journal portfolio. It's very much also dependent on disciplinary attitudes and norms. Single blind peer review, where the reviewer identity is unknown to the author, is the most common form of peer review in the industry. It's also the most common form of peer review across Springer Nature. Double-blind peer review, where both the authors and the reviewers are shielded from each other, is a very established form of peer review in the humanities and social sciences. And this community really feels that double-blind is the gold standard way of ensuring integrity in the process and reducing bias. Open peer review and transparent peer review are both forms of peer review that encourage openness and transparency in the process. Open peer review is a kind of peer review where the authors and reviewers are known to each other. So the reviewer identity is known to the authors. Typically, the reviews are published at the end of the report, and it's a requirement of this kind of peer review that the reviewers' identities are released at the end of the peer review process, along with the reports. Transparent peer review is not as open peer review, but it affords a great deal of transparency into the process. And typically in transparent peer review, the reports are released at the end of the publishing process, either with the identities if the reviewers have provided consent or without the identities. And there are many different flavors of transparent peer review. So for example, some journals require it for all their articles. Other journals allow authors to opt in. And there are yet more differences. And I'll tell you about some of those differences that are also in place at Springer Nature journals. So you can find more information about peer review and about these different models of peer review at the Springer Nature Reviewers site if you're interested in more information. So what do we know about attitudes towards peer review in the research community? We know through data from a very large 2018 survey of over 11,000 researchers carried out by Publons, which is a service for academics to track, verify, and showcase their peer review. This survey found that 98% of survey respondents considered peer review to be critical for ensuring the quality and integrity of published research. From surveys that we have conducted at Springer Nature with reviewers who review for Nature journals, those surveys have shown us that peer review is really seen as an academic duty by academic researchers, an activity that they're doing for the greater good of science. And the top 3 motivators for this group of reviewers is academic duty. 87% feel that it's their academic duty as a scientist or a researcher. And then 77% feel that they review because they feel it's important to ensure the quality of the research being published. And of course, reviewing also gives them the opportunity to stay up to date with the latest developments in their field. So at the moment, peer review is largely undervalued by institutions and by funders as a form of scholarly contribution that should be recognized and acknowledged and rewarded. But I think that is changing. So again, in this Publon survey from 2018, nearly 85% of survey respondents thought that institutions should actually explicitly require and recognize peer review contributions, and 83% thought that greater recognition and career incentives which would actually have a very positive impact on the peer review process. And this is also backed up by data conducted, data from an independent survey conducted by ASAP Bio, which is an advocacy organization led by researchers. So publishers are increasingly interested in finding ways to acknowledge and give credit to reviewers for their review contributions. And I'll tell you a little bit about initiatives at Springer Nature that allow us to do exactly that. So the current peer review landscape is quite interesting. We know that as the number of published articles grow year on year, there's great strain being put on the peer review system. The acceptance of an invitation to peer review is declining. This is a phenomenon referred to as referee fatigue. We are also seeing a geographic skew with the established research regions reviewing more than emerging regions. So all of this actually puts a great deal of pressure on the peer review system and the publishing and scholarly communications landscape as a whole. And these are pain points in the system. So at Springer Nature, we are committed to reforming and innovating peer review to address these pain points that we are seeing emerge in the research community. We want to make it constructive and efficient for authors while continuing to maintain high standards, rigor, and integrity. And so to this end, we've developed a number of initiatives that seek to reduce bias and also seek to make peer review more open and transparent and inclusive. And I'll tell you about some of these today. So the first initiative I'm going to tell you about is In Review, which is a new service that integrates preprints with the journal peer review process. But before I dive into the details of In Review, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our preprint policy. So we believe at Springer Nature that preprints can accelerate discovery through early sharing of research findings and that they can complement the journal peer review process. And we are really witnessing that now in the midst of the pandemic. We are really witnessing how researchers are sharing and using preprints, and the public, as well as the journalists and the media, as well as readers, are consuming preprints. And we're really seeing a change in behavior in the research community and in the broader society around how research is being shared and consumed during this pandemic. So what does the Springer Nature policy actually say? So we encourage authors to share preprints which are defined as an author's version of a research manuscript prior to formal peer review at a journal. We support citation of preprints and reference lists. We support CC BY licenses for preprints, and we support responsible communication with the media. So what do we mean by responsible communication with the media? Especially in the context of the pandemic, premature media coverage has emerged as a top concern about preprints in a recent survey initiated by ASAP, which is preprints advocacy organization. And we are committed as a publisher of journals as well as Science Magazine, Nature, and Scientific American to supporting early sharing for preprints and responsible journalism. And it's the responsibility of all of us, researchers, publishers, journalists, the media, to be responsible in how we use and communicate with preprints. So basically, our media policy says that researchers can respond to requests from the media in response to a preprint, if that means they are providing explanation or clarification of the work, but we strongly discourage soliciting media coverage of a paper before it has been peer reviewed. We also advise researchers, if they're responding to a journalist or the media, to make it clear that the paper has not undergone peer review and that the findings are provisional and that the conclusions may change. And we also recommend that reviewers who cover preprints very clearly indicate that the study has not been peer reviewed and the claims may change. So again, as I said, preprints are absolutely central to how we're communicating research during the pandemic. And in addition to providing free access to COVID-19 articles, we are urging all authors to share their articles as preprints. We're supporting authors to do this through our In Review service. And we're doing this in addition to a lot of other efforts we're making. For example, urging authors to share the underlying data sets, but also working very hard to ensure rapid publication, prioritizing the editorial peer review process and production process for COVID-19 papers, while also working very hard to maintain high standards of rigorous peer review. We're also partnering with external initiatives like C19 Rapid Review, which is a pan-publisher initiative that's focusing on prioritizing all aspects of peer review and publication of COVID-19 related papers. So now to tell you about InReview. So in addition to a permissive policy on preprints, we've also developed InReview as a preprint service in collaboration with our partner, Research Square. InReview is integrated with our journal and submission platform. So this is really an industry-leading innovation, I would say. And it was really developed with a vision to open up the peer review process, to offer increased transparency into the peer review process, and to provide every Springer Nature author, regardless of whether the community and the research discipline already has a preprint. We want every Springer Nature author who wants to share their research as a preprint with a simple and easy way to share their research as a preprint. So on this slide, I've shown you some examples of what the InReview interface looks like. So authors opt into InReview through the submission process. A preprint of the manuscript is deposited on the Research Square platform, generally in XML, after it has undergone some minimal quality control checks. The preprint is citable and it's available for community feedback on the Research Square platform. And then, as I said, InReview is really quite different from other preprint platforms in being integrated with the journal submission and peer review process. So InReview also provides a very high level of specific details into and real-time updates on the progress of the peer review process in a private author dashboard. There are different flavors of InReview across Springer Nature depending on the journal portfolio. So for example, if you're at a BMC open access journal, in addition to releasing the author's original version, all versions are released onto the platform, onto the Research Square platform as preprints in real time as the manuscript progresses through peer review. So authors who opt into InReview really get all the benefits of early sharing through preprints, which greatly speeds up sharing of research findings. They're able to release their research findings in a matter of days. They're able to gain from increased opportunities for early visibility, citations, reuse, collaborations. They're able to cite and point to the preprint and provide evidence of work in progress to funders and institutions. They're applying for grants. They're on the job market applying for jobs. That's a huge benefit for authors. They don't have to wait until the published paper is out. It also offers them an opportunity to engage with the wider community and get feedback from a much larger group of peers. And finally, the real-time updates really provide an unprecedented detail into the peer review process. So InReview launched in October of 2019 as a pilot on 4 BMC journals, and we were so gratified by the very positive response that it received in that initial pilot. We decided to expand it and offer it to as many Springer Nature journals as were interested. So it is now available on 328 journals with a broad distribution of disciplines. We're seeing an average opt-in across Springer Nature of 37%, which is very, very significant uptake. It's remarkably high compared to other similar initiatives in the industry. We're also seeing remarkably high uptake from authors in China. So 40% of authors who opt into InReview are from China. Since June, InReview is also available at 34 Nature research journals. That includes Nature, Nature Communications, the Nature branded research journals, as well as communications journals. The overall feedback on InReview has been incredibly positive. Authors love that they're able to share their research with the community as soon as possible. and they're also really appreciative of being able to track the status of the manuscript in real time. So we're very gratified by the support that we've seen from authors for this initiative. So now I'm going to tell you about 3 initiatives at Springer Nature that focus on transparency in peer review, specifically at BMC and Nature Research. So as some of you might know, BMC is a pioneering open access publisher. It launched in 1999 and it's been publishing open access articles since 2000. BMC are pioneers in open peer review. Biomed Central was the first publisher to openly post peer review reports with the peer review identities alongside published articles. They began doing this in 1999 for all their medical journals. And they were really driven by the considerations of accountability, that openness makes reviewers and editors more accountable for the peer review and decision-making process, as well as the desire to provide credit, so recognition for the work of peer reviewers. So now, in their 20th year anniversary, BMC has really done an overview of how peer review, open peer review has operated on their journals. They've consulted with their community. And so for maximum transparency, they're going to be operating a transparent peer review process. They're going to be rolling out transparent peer review process to all 60 journals on the BMC series, including journals and communities that are perhaps not at the forefront of transparency, that perhaps have a more conservative approach to peer review. And the way that the BMC, that transparent peer review will operate at the BMC journals is that at a journal that operates transparency peer review, every article will be published with the peer review reports. The release of peer reviewer identities is no longer required, so reviewers have a choice about whether they want to disclose their identities, and the author's responses will also be released alongside the published reports. So with Nature Research, Nature Communications has been at the forefront of initiatives to increase transparency. Nature Communications introduced transparent peer review first as a pilot in 2016. Transparent peer review at Nature Communications works a little bit differently than at the BMC journals that I just told you about. In this case, authors can opt in to transparent peer review. So not every article that's published in Nature Communications goes through transparent peer review. Authors can opt in. Peer reviewers must agree as a condition of reviewing that if an author opts in, their reviewer reports will be released alongside the published paper. And Nature Communications also publishes the author responses, and all this information is provided as an integrated peer review file. So in the first year of the pilot, we saw 60% uptake, and now in 2019, it has increased to nearly 70%. The uptake, not surprisingly, varies by discipline. So we're seeing very high uptake of around 70 to 80% among molecular biologists and the ecology and evolution community. At the other end of the spectrum, we're still seeing quite high uptake of around 40 to 50% among the physicists, material scientists, and chemists community. So there's actually strong positive response from authors and reviewers for transparency in peer review. And the desire for transparency is also evident when we survey our reviewers at Nature Research. So 38% of reviewers felt that openness in peer review was beneficial, and 44% of these respondents were actually from Asia who found that openness was beneficial. 78% said they would agree to review if an anonymous reviewer report and the author rebuttal was published alongside the manuscript. So on the basis of the success of the transparent peer review at Nature Communications and the feedback that we've received from our authors and reviewers, in the last 2 years, we have extended transparent peer review. And I'm really very pleased and proud to be able to tell you that in 2020, transparent peer review has launched. It's now available at Nature and 7 Nature research journals. It's also available at the communications journals and at all Nature reviews journals. So now I'd like to tell you about yet another transparency initiative at Nature journals, focusing now on transparency and recognition for reviewers. So this initiative was actually first piloted at Nature in 2016. At the end of the peer review process, peer reviewers were given the option of having their names formally acknowledged on the published paper, and by so doing, providing transparency into the identities of the experts who assessed the paper, as well as recognition to this group of experts for their contributions to peer review. And you can see over here the peer review information, the names of the reviewers are disclosed, and Nature thanks the group of peer reviewers for their contribution to the peer review of the work. So 91% of Nature authors opted into this pilot, and 55% of reviewers opted in. And we were absolutely astonished by the reception to this pilot. We did not expect it to receive such an enthusiastic reception from authors and reviewers. So at the end of 3 years of the pilot, it is now a stable initiative. At Nature, we had 3,300 Nature reviewers who chose to be publicly recognized on the papers that they had contributed to peer review, and 80% of Nature papers published in that time frame have at least one reviewer name. So that's a huge amount of transparency into the process. And we really wanted to understand whether this intervention, this pilot, who are the authors and the reviewers who are taking part in the trial, and we really wanted to ensure that this initiative to recognize reviewers on published papers did not inadvertently put any of the groups of authors and reviewers that we work with at a disadvantage. So we analyzed gender and career stage of authors and reviewers who took part in the trial. This is a snapshot of data from a 9-month period. And we found that the percentage of the male and female authors opting into the trial was similar. The proportion of female and male reviewers was also similar, although there were more male reviewers opting into the trial. And we were really encouraged to see that the numbers of early career stage research reviewers and late career stage reviewers was very, very close, 54% to 55%. So these data gave us confidence that this intervention was not skewing the system and introducing incentives that are potentially hurtful to the system and potentially could end up excluding certain groups from an initiative that's designed to actually give reviewers credit. We also surveyed our reviewers to understand their attitudes and their views to releasing reviewer names and to understand their perspective on the impact it has on the integrity of the peer review process. The overall feedback has again been very positive. 78% felt that naming reviewers would result in better written reports. 68% felt naming reviewers would result in better transparency, and 52% would consider being named if given the option. So based on the reception of reviewer transparency and recognition at Nature and the feedback that we've received from the reviewer community. We have over the years extended this initiative to the portfolio of Nature journals. So in 2016, it became available on all Nature Reviews journals. In 2018, it became available on 8 Nature Research journals. And this year, in 2020, it's going to be available across all Nature-branded journals. So with that, so in addition to these specific initiatives at Nature Research, where we publicly acknowledge reviewer contributions on the published paper, we also have a number of other initiatives focused around providing acknowledgement and appreciating the contributions of our editors. I won't tell you about all of them, but I wanted to tell you about 2 initiatives where Springer Nature has partnered with Publons and Orchid to support our peer reviewers and to create pathways for them to claim credit for the reviews that they have carried out. So I hope that by sharing with you these initiatives, I have shown you how it's possible to build trust through transparency. I think revealing the details of the peer review process, as well as the releasing the reviewer reports, the editorial decision letters, the author correspondence, the names of the reviewers who contributed to the peer review, provides greater transparency into the decision making. It increases accountability for editors and peer reviewers and anyone involved in the peer review process, and it builds trust in the process. It also provides context for the published research. The released reviewer reports are very rich, expert commentary on the published paper, and they allow the reader and the public at large to evaluate the quality of the process and the quality of the published research. And this is especially true now during the pandemic, where, again, as I mentioned, the public at large and the media is consuming and talking about research on COVID-19, and these published review reports can actually be very helpful in terms of providing insight into the significance of these findings, as well as the limitations of the study. And it's the first step. Releasing the review reports is really the first step to create a path for institutions to recognize reviewers and to recognize the reviewer reports as scholarly contributions. So as we work to increase trust in peer review through transparency, we also believe at Springer Nature that we have a responsibility to foster diversity and inclusion in publishing. And we believe that working together to build a more inclusive publishing and scholarly communication landscape and community is going to be essential for us to build and maintain the trust of the research community. And so Springer Nature is committed to taking an active role to improve diversity and inclusion in all aspects of the publishing process. In 2019, Nature Research committed to specific practices to support diversity and inclusion. We recognize that there are many dimensions to diversity, including gender, race and ethnicity, geography, and career stage. And one important aspect of Nature Research's commitment to fostering diversity and inclusion involves aiming for a diverse representation within the groups of reviewers that we engage with. So we believe that early career researchers are essential to the overall health of the research system. And they are essential to our overall efforts as a publisher to provide robust and reliable peer review, to continue to expand our pool of reviewers, and we believe that they are central to our efforts on diversity and inclusion. We also know from surveys like the 2018 Publons report that getting early career researchers involved in reviewing earlier in their career can be very beneficial for the development of their own careers, because it teaches them and it gives them insight into how the process works. So we've developed a number of resources across Springer Nature to help train early career researchers. So these range from a free online course to help train early career researchers on the roles and responsibilities of reviewers, to more intensive one-day workshops on how to be an effective peer reviewer. And we've also in 2020, we're also piloting 2 mentoring schemes in peer review in Nature research journals. And I'll tell you about those mentoring schemes that we are piloting. So the first one is a pilot mentoring scheme for training early career researchers that was introduced at Nature Communications. It was developed as a collaboration with Sense About Science, which is an independent charity that champions public interest in sound science. And this mentoring scheme involves 2 phases. So in the first phase, Nature Communications editors interact with early career researchers, and they provide them a webinar on peer review, on effective peer review, and the roles and responsibilities of researchers. And then in a second phase, which is a hands-on coaching phase, in which select participants, and the participants are selected by Sense About Science, are invited to review a paper for Nature Communications and to work with the editors of the journal to receive feedback and input on the peer review they've provided and ways to improve it, and what they've done that works very well and where there are areas for improvement and so on. And the second scheme I'm going to tell you about was introduced in March 2020 at the Nature Reviews journals. And it was introduced because these journals are committed to facilitating training in peer review and to ensure that early career researchers receive proper credit for their contributions to peer review. So last year, a study was published that showed that in surveys, about 92% of early career researchers who responded in the survey had in fact contributed to peer review, but their contributions were not formally acknowledged in any way, and that 50% of these early career researchers did not receive any training. So the scheme at Nature Reviews is really trying to address that gap. So they want to ensure that early career researchers receive proper credit for their contribution. They want to encourage training of early career researchers on how to peer review articles, and they want to expand the pool of well-trained reviewers. So the way the pilot works is that established reviewers are asked to co-review with an early career researcher, and in so doing, to mentor the early career researcher. And the review that's provided to the journal is treated as a co-review, and the early career researchers benefit from all the schemes that Nature Research and Springer Nature journals offer for peer review recognition. So including acknowledgement on the paper itself, which I told you about, as well as being able to claim credit through partnerships with entities like ORCID and Publands. So the average uptake for the scheme is around 30%. So 30% of manuscripts have at least one early career researcher involved in co-review. The feedback from reviewers has been very positive. They've all scored the initiative as excellent. And so on that basis, we've expanded the mentoring scheme now to a total of 14 Nature Reviews journals in 2020. So with that, I am now going to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who's contributed to this webinar. I would like to acknowledge Ayako Miyazaki and Sayaka Yamane, who have helped put together this webinar. for their fantastic effort and support. A lot of people across Springer Nature work to make peer review happen, and all the initiatives that I told you about are really driven by the dedication and commitment and passion of these people across Springer Nature. We really believe in good quality, integrity, and rigorous peer review. So I just want to take a minute to acknowledge all of them. And with that, I think we can move to the Q&A session.
So thank you very much, Sowmya, for your presentation. So as she mentioned, we will now be having the question and answer session. So please feel free to enter any questions in the question box. Some of you have been asking about slides. We will be sharing the recordings and slides after the session. And we also had some questions asked upon registration, so I would like to pick up a few from there. So Sowmya, if the article is rejected and the preprint will remain public, so can the article be submitted to other journals? I think this refers to in review.
Yes, so if an article is rejected, so one of the things that in review does is it associates either the journal name or the imprint name with the preprint. If an article is rejected, the first thing that happens is all history of peer review or association with the journal is removed. And so the article just lives on the Research Square platform as a citable preprint. And yes, the article can absolutely be submitted to other journals for peer review. I should say that many publishers and journals, including all the large publishers, have adopted a permissive policy on peer review. So they are open to, to preprints. They are open to preprints. They do not consider preprints to be prior publication. Nevertheless, there are journals out there that do consider preprints to be prior publication. So we would advise authors to be aware of the preprint policies of the journals in their community and their discipline. And if you go to the Springer Nature landing page, we do provide a bit more information in the FAQ section about that. I think that's
Okay, thank you, Sowmya.
yeah.
I hope this answers your question. So another question is, I think it's from a lecture. The question is, I try to manage a local journal at my institution and building trust is difficult. I want to know more about how to build trust.
Yes, so I think new journals have, a number of challenges, but there are also a number of resources to help them. Trust is essential, not only for the peer review process, but trust is essential to build a community. You need to trust from your authors, trust from your readers, trust from your peer reviewers. And there are a number of resources for how to do that, for ethical guidelines to create a journal that follows sound ethical integrity principles. The Committee on Publication Ethics has a number of resources for journal editors about the policies they should put in place to ensure rigorous and peer review that has a high level of integrity. So I would say COPE should be the first point, I think, for a new journal editor to go to find out about publication ethics and building trust in the journal process.
Okay, thank you, Sowmya. So another question is, I would like to know how Springer Nature will invent a methodology for filtering preprints beyond speeding up its current peer review process. Do you have any views on that?
Yes, so I think this is a challenge for the industry and the community at large. I was actually talking to someone earlier today about what are the tools that are out there to search across preprints, because there's a proliferation of preprint servers. And so are there tools to search for preprints? And in fact, there are a number of tools now to search across preprint servers. And there are a number of indexers who are starting to index preprints. So Google Scholar allows you to search across preprint servers and the published literature. PubMed Central, Europe PMC actually indexes preprints in the life sciences. Meta, which is a search engine provided by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, indexes and searches across life science and biomedical preprints. PubMed has just started a pilot to index life science preprints. So there's a lot of development now around search. Now, so search is one aspect of it. Filtering is a different aspect of it. And by filtering, I mean, well, if you've got 1,000 preprints, how do you know which one to read? And you don't have, you don't have the proxy of the journal name, let's say, to help you filter. So I think that's a challenge, and I don't know that the community has cracked it. A number of preprint servers now provide additional features like social media threads or coverage in blogs and the media, and that gives you an idea of the attention the preprint has received, and that may help filter. So that is an interesting challenge. There are also other discussions in the community about how you can build ways to increase the credibility and trust of a preprint. So the Center for Open Science did a survey last year, I believe, which is available as a preprint, where they surveyed a large group of researchers for what they believe are the elements of a preprint that would encourage their trust in a preprint. And what was interesting is open research practices are a big driver of trust, as well as policies around transparency and disclosures of competing interests. So data availability, having a very clear data availability statement, making your data available is actually could become one way of filtering, because then a researcher, a user knows that they can actually look at the data and also, ascertain some of the claims.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Oh, sorry, did you want to add something?
No, I think that was...
Yes, thank you. So we have quite a lot of questions coming in. So just to ask on their behalf. So another question is, if a journal's policy includes a double-blind peer review, can we not generate a preprint version of it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? If a journal's policy, right. If a journal's policy, so this is an interesting debate and tension. I've told you about transparency and preprints and early sharing and the benefits of transparency and early sharing. But there's a really dedicated community of researchers that believes the way to foster a bias-free peer review is through double-blind. And so that's a tension there. How do you maintain double-blind when a preprint is out there with the author's name on it? We offer double-blind at the Nature Research journals, and we also offer in-review and preprint sharing at the Nature Research journals. And we believe that the two can coexist. We believe that double-blind peer review is fundamentally about ensuring that reviewers understand that the identity of the author, the institutional affiliation, what part of the world they're from is irrelevant. It's not relevant to the peer review process, and what's relevant is the research. So we believe that the way to manage the tension between double-blind and preprint is to reinforce the code of ethics, to for the reviewers, and that's effectively that's the approach we would take. And of course, authors have to be aware that if they have a preprint, their identity could be known. I should also say that ASAP Bio, which is a advocacy organization focused on preprints, actually has some information about double-blind peer review and preprints, and we actually worked with them to help develop that statement in the FAQ. And I also want to mention the example of the Institute of Physics, which has just announced that they're going to make double-blind peer review available across all their journals, because they believe that in order to foster an inclusive environment free of bias, this is the way to do it. And of course, the physics community are very heavy users of preprints. They've been using preprints for a very, very long time. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how IOP manages the tension between double-blind and preprints. But we're effectively, positive. We don't think it's an either or, and we don't believe that you have to just do one or the other. But we do believe it's going to be a question of really reinforcing the reviewer code of conduct.
Okay, thank you. We also have a question about preprints. So if a researcher shares their preprints through ResearchGate, do Nature journals still accept their preprint for submission?
Do you mean through Research Square?
ResearchGate, I think. It's the social platform for researchers. So having the preprint shared through a different platform.
I would say that our preprint policy allows authors to share their preprints. We do not specify where authors can share their preprints. We allow authors to share their preprints. We support a CC BY policy, a CC BY license for preprints. We do not maintain a directory of preprint repositories or a list of acceptable preprint repositories. There are directories out there in the community that have essentially compiled a list of all the preprint repositories that are available, with a list of their policies and practices. And I think that is a useful resource for somebody who is a first-time preprinter to understand a bit more about the policies and practices of the repository that they're using. But we don't maintain lists of preprint repositories. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. This is related to COVID-19. So a week ago, there was a journal policy change reacting on the retraction of a COVID-19 paper which used the fraud database. So it continues. They are going to introduce additional peer review by a data scientist, and peer reviewers are usually experts in this field, and this move is very different. Do you think that this will expand to other journals and publishers as well?
I assume that the question is referring to the Lancet policy, but maybe not. But in any case, the Lancet too has changed their policy in relation to data, on the heels of the retraction of the COVID-19 paper. I think these are very interesting questions. Most journals, there are some journals that are dedicated to reviewing the large data sets. So Scientific Data, for example, which is a Springer Nature data-focused journal, reviews the data set. That is what they review. So I think these are very, very interesting questions and challenges. When you have very large, complex, multidimensional data sets, I think that there are a number of challenges one has to think about. Making the data available to reviewers in a manner that allows them to actually interrogate the data, involving a larger group of reviewers who are able to interrogate the data in a number of different ways. So I think this is an interesting question and an interesting challenge. And I do believe that there will be future developments where journals increasingly review the outputs independently from the analysis, which is the paper itself. We're already doing that for code, actually, at Nature Journals. We have an initiative now where we partnered with CodeOcean to peer review the code for papers where the code is central to the research, and it's been received very positively by authors and reviewers. And I do think that there will come a time where we will start taking those same approaches toward data. And I actually think that preprints allow us to do some of these things because they allow us to perhaps break up the peer review process into discrete phases. They allow us to think about having an open period for community input. And the community can actually go in and interrogate the data, assuming that it's not confidential data with data privacy considerations and so on. So these are very interesting questions. I don't have a solution yet, but these are certainly the sorts of questions that we will be thinking about and discussing and wanting to pilot.
Right, thank you. We also have a couple of questions regarding a paper that has been rejected. So will peer reviewers still get credit for a rejected paper, and will their identities be revealed for them?
So at Nature Journals, the reviewer recognition initiative is only available on published papers, which they're acknowledged on the published papers. So that's in fact the only way to do it. For Publons and Orchids, this question has been raised. The question has been raised as to whether reviewers can claim credit for papers that they reviewed but were then not published, they were rejected by the journal. And I'm afraid I don't have an answer immediately for you as to how we resolve that issue, but it's certainly something that we are discussing. I think if people want to actually, if there's a way for us to sort of collect some of this information, even post the webinar to feedback to people, we can do that.
Okay, great. I think this is a question from a researcher, but it's about building a career in peer review and what basic knowledge is required for peer review.
Well, typically we invite reviewers who are experts in their field. So I think that is sort of the first step. As a reviewer, do you feel that you have the expertise to review papers in your field? And to then also make a determination about competing interests. Is the author a former mentor, in which case that's probably a competing interest. But I think in order to really get insight into what peer reviewers need, the training for peer reviewers, I would strongly encourage people to go and check out our free online resource on training peer reviewers. I think they will find that is quite useful in terms of providing initial set of guidance into the roles and responsibilities of peer reviewers.
All right, thank you very much. So it's nearly the end of the session, and I'm afraid we won't be able to cover all the questions, but So thank you very much, Sowmya, and thank you very much all of you for joining. A recording, including the slides, will be available afterwards, and we would appreciate it if you could answer the questionnaire after this session. And if you have any questions, please do let us know. And many thanks again for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
So we will now be ending this session. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.